originally I was going, oh, there you go. I was going to also continue talking about the North Dakota side of this, but I don't see anybody in from North Dakota today. So I'll just do a separate recording on that one um, to kind of help and assist with this. So I am guessing a fair amount of you are pretty familiar with facilitation deals. So this primarily came up because we started asking ourselves more about how to go through this. We've noticed in some of the compliance reviews and different things that we're missing some things. More questions are coming up in that as well. So we just started to say maybe there's an opportunity to talk about this on a little bit of a larger scale. So that's what we're going to do today is really kind of dive into some of the specifics as it relates to facilitator deals. And I'm going to go ahead and let's see here. There's only a handful of us here. So let's do um, um no. Okay. Sorry. I'm trying to get my screens and everything all set up here because it's all wonky as all get up. But anyway. Um oh yeah, and then we got to do this whole thing because
Good morning, all. I am alive.
welcome.
Don't look too closely. I have no makeup on right now because I just literally rolled out of bed from a 12:30 flight.
That's okay. You can look real closely, and I have no makeup on either. So we are doing great things this morning.
I have a cup of coffee and a shower. That's half the battle.
Sometimes that's as good as it gets, right? So, I love it. Okay, so facilitator relationships. How many of you have done a facilitator relationship? Let's start there.
Too many this year.
Too many. That seems to be the name
Mhm.
of the game this year, which is just
Really?
fine. We are seeing a lot
Mm.
of them. Yep. We've
Mm.
seen a significant increase in them, which is one of the reasons we wanted to talk about them, because there is a really unique opportunity for facilitation roles. Now, one of the things we're gonna do since everybody here is Minnesota only. My deck is prepped for North Dakota. I'm not going to talk about that today. We'll keep it just for that. So if you're interested in North Dakota side, we can certainly talk about it because they do handle it differently, which is kind of fun. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. So um, here's a little bit about where we're going to go. We're going to talk about the Minnesota side, where the facilitator relationship fits, how you work inside of that space. We're going to talk about the definition. We're going to talk about fiduciary obligations. We're going to talk about what you can and can't do. We're going to talk about some of the conversation traps and what happens inside of those and when your little spidey senses need to take off. We're going to talk about how you get paid in some of that. And then I do have a little bit of a game, if you will, that we'll play at the end. And by all means, everybody, if you have questions, comments, concerns, I got my chat open. You can come off mute. It's designed to be interactive and a little less lecture based because I just don't need it to be me all the time. So since um, Zoom primarily only shows me in this situation, there or just come off camera and we'll have a grand old time, or come off mute and ask questions as we go, and we'll be doing great things. So here's what happens a lot of the times. We get these comments that I don't want an agent, right? I just want to buy this house. Can it just be that simple? I just want to buy this house. Just do it for me. I don't need an agent. Well, when we hear this phrase, there's a lot of questions that we should be asking ourselves as licensed professionals in Minnesota, right? So, what is this individual to us? What do we owe her, right? And can we actually get paid? Without a formal representation agreement, you are not obligated or allowed to receive compensation. And I don't know about you, as I tell every single client I sit down with in my consultations, I am a for-profit enterprise. I don't work for free. It's not my jam. Some people enjoy working for free. Bless you. That's not what we do here at Coldwell Banker Crown. We believe in you getting compensated for your time, effort, skill, and energy. We believe in you kind of making that space and creating opportunities to impact lives through real estate. And one of those ways is by getting paid, which is why we want to talk about facilitator roles today. So now, here's the thing that I really want to emphasize to you: no matter what, conduct beats the label. Okay. what you do and how you treat somebody is going to be whatever type of representation agreement you have in place. Now, in Minnesota, the default role is a facilitation only representation. That is the default role. Statutorily, it is the default role in which we look at how we contract as a licensee. Because you got to remember, the state holds us in a different level, at a different level than the cute little sheep. As the big bad wolves we are, the cute little sheep, we have to watch out for them. So there are state law, state statutes that specifically tell us how we are to interact with people until they engage us in a representation, right? So while you're if we go to court at the end of the day, and somebody gives a testimony to how you help them or you guided them, the court is going to look at that and say what you did for them, how you interacted with them, the conduct in which you conducted yourself is going to far surpass any of the labels when it comes down to the hammer being dropped. Okay. So it is actually incredibly important. There's a reason we talk about agency law almost every year. There's a reason it's required by the Department of Commerce. There is lots of reasons why facilitation matters. And because facilitator role is the default status in the great state of Minnesota, we have to talk about that. And we're going to have those conversations today because a lot of you are starting to do many, many more facilitation roles. So here's how we're going to kind of dive into that. Again, you have questions, chat me, come off mute. It doesn't matter at all. This is the statutory relationship, services without representation, 8255, 8266, 8267, and 8268, in case you're really nerdy and you want to go to the reviser's website and look them up. Yes, these are all Chapter 82, which is the real estate license law chapter according to Minnesota statutes. These are the ways in which you actually get it. It is a named statutory relationship. In North Dakota, facilitator is not a named statutory, which is why we're calling it out. This is an actual role and representation methodology that is approved by the state in order for you to conduct yourself. Now, where does the facilitator role actually fit in the conversations? Okay, so here's a couple things. Number one, we have the opportunity to always work in a seller's broker relationship. And I think you know this, and if you don't, that's cool. We're going to talk about it anyway. This is the primary relationship in which you are representing who? Somebody say seller.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. Okay, the seller, right? Okay, so it's even on the screen. I even said it. It's not a trick question to you. So where the facilitator role fits, okay? So again, seller's broker, fiduciary obligations are to the seller. We have another obligation underneath a buyer's broker agreement in which fiduciary duties are owed to the
Buyer.
Thank you. We have dual agency, okay? Not designated agency, which is what Brandon wishes we have and is advocating for. But in the state of Minnesota presently, we have something known as dual agency. This is when limited duties are to both parties, both buyers and sellers. Notice I did not say people you facilitate, people you represent. It is buyers and sellers. You can only have buyers and sellers when they are under contract. And you know they're under contract because you have a written consent that states that you are under contract. Hence why those agreements are so absolutely critical. Then this last one we have is this magical space known as the facilitator role, right? Here's the deal. You service in a facilitation capacity for either both parties or one party. You can't mix representation and facilitation. Okay. If you represent somebody, meaning you have an agreement, whether a seller broker, then you are not in a position to facilitate for anybody within that same contract because Minnesota state statute clearly states that when you are in a designated relationship, okay, meaning a seller's broker or a buyer's broker, that's going to supersede your obligation to somebody in a facilitation, and it automatically puts the person in a facilitation role at a detriment, right? Which is why, if you think about it, let's back up to the dual agency component. When we are talking to clients and consumers about dual agency, the kicker in all of that states that, well, why would I allow you to do this, right? Well, you would allow me to do this for speed. You would allow me to do this potentially for some compensation reduction, which I don't advise, but some people do that. I would also then do this primarily to move the transaction along and ease the process on everybody, because we all know that even in a transaction, you still do some work on behalf of the seller, you still do some work on behalf of the buyer, setting up closings, right? Working with inspectors, There's some of these things that we still do. My personal favorite and irritation is when the buyer's inspector calls me for access to the property. That's my new irritation, and I had it happen to me on one listing of mine that went under contract. And the inspector called me and said, "Hey, Brandon, just wondering how I can get access to the property to do the inspection." I said, "Cool. Did you check with your client's agent?" And he said, "Well, I just thought I would call you." I said, "That's cool. The inspection is not my responsibility. So you need to call the other agent and get them to get you access." Oh, okay. Because here's the thing, he wanted me to come and unlock the door for him. And believe it or not, folks, I did not feel an obligation to do that. Some people would say, "But Brandon, you're trying to get the deal moving. You got to like get this thing done." I'm like, I totally get that. But here's the deal. I didn't feel an obligation to do it because it's not my job to get the inspector in. It's actually in my best interest if the inspector doesn't show up, in my client's best interest. So I'm like, why do I need to go out of my way because the buyer's agent is lazy and didn't want to meet you to open the door, and you are a lazy inspector and aren't going to pay the $20 or whatever in order to have access to open my lock boxes?
That's why you guys should get Sentry Lock. Really. I mean, come on. Get your
Well,
poop in a group.
I could give them a 1 day code. It has nothing to do with access. It has to do with I'm doing somebody else's job. So I just wasn't interested. Anyway, needless to say, I think both that agent and the inspector were like, "Whoa." I was like, "Yeah, I'm not going to do your job for you today. I have enough to do." So anyway,
Mhm.
the representation side. Let me get back on the topic at hand instead of my weird antidote stories. So anyway, the facilitator relationship. You can facilitate both sides of the transaction. You can facilitate one side of the transaction, but the moment you represent anybody in the transaction, you can't do a facilitation deal. You put them at an automatic negative, and state law says that they don't want the little tiny sheep in the communities to be eaten up by you, the big bad wolves. Does that make sense? Anybody got questions on that?
Yeah. What if it's
There's
my listing and the buyer doesn't want to sign a representation contract? Can I
goodness,
facilitate for the buyer and get
a
paid?
fantastic job leading me to where we're going to talk about. I'm going to answer all those in a little bit here, so give me a second on that one. Okay, so agency attaches. I should have hit this before I asked for your questions. I'm sorry, team. Right, but key concept here. So agency attaches to the brokerage, right? Not the salesperson, because in Minnesota we don't have designated agency, which again I wish we did, but we don't right now. Okay, so we have dual agency. Okay, which means it attaches at the brokerage level, not the salesperson. So if anybody at Crown represents a party, the whole brokerage does. Okay, which is also a really cool marketing tactic if you're in presentations and you want to know, well, how much support do you have behind you? Well, I got a whole slew of agents that are helping me out. I got brokers and leaders and blah, blah, blah. Like you got a slew of people behind you that could also help drive your value of services up, by the way. So that's another thing just to consider in the process as you move forward. So let's talk about the definition. So a broker or salesperson who performs services for a buyer, seller, or both, but does not represent either in a fiduciary capacity. Okay. So you can still perform services for somebody and not perform any fiduciary obligations, right? Now, who do we want to? No, I'm not going to. Never mind. Okay, so this is a straight disclosure that nobody's on camera with me. I missed all of you. Anyway, so when we talk about the fiduciary stack, right? There's this beautiful old adage called old car, LC Dora, depends upon your age and demographic on when you took your license law, right? But here's what they basically stand for: obedience, loyalty, disclosure, accounting, reasonable care, and confidentiality. What matters to you is that in the facilitation role, which is also the default role in the state of Minnesota, the only fiduciary thing that survives is confidentiality. So it don't matter if I go to the coffee shop across the road and somebody says, "Oh, hey, I'm thinking about selling my house." Whoop, super cool. Somebody has now engaged me in an activity that is relative to my license. Now I have to put my real estate salesperson's license hat on, which says I'm now in this space. Somebody says, "How's the market?" Right? Like even that is a question to which could trigger in Minnesota specifically, could trigger you to have to put that hat on, because the old adage we used to be taught was like, "Well, it's a great market. Are you interested in buying or selling?" Right? Like so you could go down either lane. But the moment you do that, you're starting to perform services because they start to ask questions, right? That go beyond factual data. So when we start to get into the opinionated space, that's when the fiduciary capacity starts to trigger, right? Now, then that triggers you which path you go down. However, the other side of that is to say, when you start to be engaged with that, you have to remember the facilitator role is the default role. Without a contractual obligation, that is the default role in the state of Minnesota. The default fiduciary obligation, right? Any legal obligation, I should state, not even default, it's legally obligated to provide consumers and customers with confidentiality. So what is really hard is understanding that balance between when you can give information up and when you cannot give information up, right? And part of that is going to be dictated based upon the relationship of the parties that you are in. Okay, so you have to remember confidentiality is always going to stick around. Who has questions on this one?
So does the
For those of you,
confidentiality stick around if I actually represent a buyer? So let's say I represent a seller, but the buyer doesn't want to be represented. Well, then I'm not in a fiduciary situation. So then I guess, yeah, I answered my own question.
so what was your answer?
Yeah, I don't owe them any of those. I don't owe them confidentiality.
Yeah.
So once you step over that line, if they're in a fiduciary situation, we're out looking at homes, but then I cross that line and now I show a Coldwell Banker Crown listing, that confidentiality goes away because I actually represent a seller.
Yeah, and this is where the lines get a little questionable in full transparency because while confidentiality always survives, right? It becomes what is in the best interest of the person I'm representing, right? So oftentimes I'll make up a scenario, Christine, around kind of where we're at here. Buyer comes in and says, "Hey, I want to write an offer on this thing, but I'm only going to pay X dollars." Okay, like they gave me price, right, which is one of those magical components. But we would have an obligation to disclose that to our seller because our fiduciary obligations in fullness belong to our seller, who we are actually in a contract with. We are not in a contract with the person who just walked through the door. So there is this ebb and flow space that we have to kind of bob and weave through in order to get. But at the end of the day, if you're unsure, just keep it confidential. There's no reason you can't, but you can't do anything to the detriment of the party that you are actually under contract with. So there is this fine line of understanding, well, where is that confidential? Well, confidentiality is one thing. Doing something destructive to your client by not informing them is a different thing, which is why material facts, honesty, all those things are still in state statute. They're still legally required because of your license, because those things matter and you can't work around them. So when in doubt, keep it confidential, right? If it's going to do something to the detriment of your clients, then you have a totally different obligation to follow inside of there. Hopefully that added a little zhuzh to what you were going with, Christine, because you're right. Okay. Let's talk about things you can say and things you can't say. Facilitator role, right? Like that's the lens in which we're looking at things. Things that you can do in a facilitator role. You can show property. You can schedule properties. You can fill in a purchase agreement at the party's discretion. Totally fine. You can transmit offers and counter offers, and you can be the message carrier. You can be UPS, right? Like you don't know what's in the package, but you can sure as heck transmit that thing. Although some UPS drivers do know what's in the package because they're really good at their jobs. But that's not the point. Providing factual market information, right? You can use comps as data. Here's what the data says. Coordinate paperwork through closing, and you can handle material facts. Is there one more? Oh, and you can get paid. There is. Look at that. You can get paid. Look at that. So these are all things that you can do in a facilitator role. What are some things that you can't do? Because that's always the fun part. You can't advocate or negotiate for either party. Okay. Here's a prime example of something that I was. So I was working on a counter offer with an agent who is a complete schmuck. And I know this agent's a complete schmuck, right? So I was working with him on one of my listings, and the offer was so low, we weren't doing anything. And I knew my client was going to be just agitated if I brought this to him. But I did my job because I'm required to present a written offer. The offer was written. I brought it to them and I said, here's the offer. do not respond until I come back to you with a counter is what I told them. And so I went on behalf of my client. I was negotiating the price because I knew it was ridiculously low, right? So we continued to move forward and negotiate through that. So I had the ability to advocate for my client, right, and negotiate for them with their consent and permission, which I had. Okay, so this whole thing is like an opportunity where if I was in a facilitator relationship with somebody, I have no right to do that. Okay. I don't have the right to say this offer is way low. I know you don't want it. Let me see what I can do before I waste more of your time thinking about it and coming back to me. What I am also not allowed to do is advise on price, strategy, and terms, right? Price, terms, and motivation would be another one that we talk about. Like, so when the moment you say I would, that's your flag word, right? The moment that you would start to respond to a question in a conversation with somebody and you would say I would, or based on market data, whatever the phrase would be that you're starting to create a narrative around the topic at hand, that is your red flag that says, whoop, I am not being compensated for my skill and my value here, and I am not allowed to do that unless I'm in a seller broker or a buyer broker relationship. Okay. Like you can't. You can be compensated, yes, as a facilitator, but when people start to ask your advice and your counsel, that's my flag that says, whoop, I want a full on representation agreement. You want my knowledge and my expertise, you're going to pay for it, mister. Okay. Like that's the whole story. So you're not allowed to advise on price and strategy. So somebody talked to me about, I think price is relatively simple. Somebody give me an idea on what would strategy be? Like what would be the flag on a strategy when you hear that? What does that mean to you that you think you can't do under a facilitator role?
You're facilitating for a buyer and there's multiple offers on the table. You can't talk to them about strategy, about writing their offer.
That would be
I'm
a
just
great
going to
one.
say escalation clause. Yeah, that was the thing that came to my mind
Yep.
too.
Escalation clauses would be, that is a strategy. That's a tool that our industry has. Before COVID, it was used rarely. Okay.
Really?
Did we have them? Yep, but it was really rare. COVID came about, and that's when we got our attorneys involved to say, like, we better have a really good clause to use. So, by the way, if you're using escalation clauses, please use the one that we have for you in the clauses and transaction desk. Drop that into an amendment and modify it so that you have a good binding agreement. Because my favorite escalation clauses are, we'll pay $1,000 over any other offer. That's my personal favorite. I'm like, cool. I'm gonna offer them an extra 50 grand, so you're up another $51,000, right? Like, it's just a terrible offer. Anyway, okay, that's good. So that would be another strategy. Or we talk about like the term side of it, right? Closing date, type of financing. You are not allowed to give strategy on terms either, right? So they're kind of coinciding. You can't say, this house isn't going to go FHA, or you're only an FHA buyer. This one's going to go. These are the two things that are going to flag that. Here's what we need to put in the offer to make sure that it doesn't get flagged, right? We're going to ask the seller to, strip the paint off the garage and repaint. Okay. We're going to ask them to put the railing up to make sure that it's not, above 36 inches so that a kid could fall through or something, right? Like, so all of that knowledge that you hold, or the brokerage holds, right? Because we're all in the representation here. You don't have the opportunity to provide. And that's the big one. That's where we get tripped up, because here's the hard part, team. A lot of us come from a helping mindset. Like, I want to help you. I want you to get this house. I think it's the best thing for you. It's going to be an amazing opportunity. I'm going to give you everything I have. But you know what? I just broke the law. Like, in the nicest way, team. That's the rub. Well, Brandon, I was only going 75 and a 55. It's totally fine, right? Like, that's cool, but you're still breaking the law. It's pretty black and white at the end of the day. The moment you say, well, I would do, or I would suggest, that I would phrasing is the absolute kicker when it comes to flipping the script on which role you're sitting in. So hopefully I made that abundantly clear for you. One thing you can't do, use one party's confidential information for the other. Okay? Ever. As we just talked about, right? You can't drift into representation behavior without changing the relationship in writing. Almost like we just talked about that too. And also, you can't advertise representation. A facilitator represents absolutely nobody. And I think that's a really key space to note is that facilitation is not representation. Because oftentimes we will say, well, I could represent you. You walk through agency. These are the 4 types of representation in the state of Minnesota. Technically, that is not true. Okay. Is it a verbiage that we will sometimes say to try to help a consumer understand why we're making them sign this document right away? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, facilitation is not representation. You are simply a conduit, right? Think of it as you are UPS. That's all you're doing. You're carrying information back and forth without any care in the world of what is that information, right? I don't care if it's a $6 million vase that's in a box or if it's some cheap thing from Amazon that's shown up because my kids accidentally ordered something through Alexa. Like, it's a whole thing. But anyway, questions here.
Brandon, I just can't see behind your head.
Oh,
There's some.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're not wrong here.
Well, I just wanted to quickly write it down.
No, you're totally fine. Let me just. There you go. I should have moved myself. You're not wrong. I'm telling you, Zoom's really up in their game these days, aren't they? They're doing great things. Like, I can just put myself all over the screen. I can make myself huge. Or I can make myself itty bitty living space. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, conversation trap. So let's talk a little bit about what this would look like. So when the brokerage already owes fiduciary obligations to someone in the deal, again, the fiduciary obligation wins. So here's a couple examples, Katie, that I think you were looking for. What happens when a facilitator working with a buyer, shows a property listed by their own brokerage? Now, new practice change would tell you that, well, I have to have a buyer rep agreement. No. Is it our brokerage best practice? Absolutely. But you don't have to, right? You just have to have a written agreement is what our practice is. Our company policy states that you should have a buyer broker agreement because that's the best scenario, because then that magical phrase of, well, I would fill in the blank is no longer an issue, because then you can start to regurgitate how awesome you are and how great you're going to advise somebody. But in this situation, you must act as the seller's broker, right? You can't be nobody's agent on your own company listings, because again, by default, you walk into a Crown listing, you represent that seller, or you are in a dual agency capacity. It's one or the other. Okay, the facilitator role ain't happening. Okay. And this is why, again, we've walked through this and I've shared with you guys, like the reality says, like, you can show properties. Like when people call me, like I got a commercial building in Alec here, the first sale that people are loving because it's a historic kind of iconic building in the area. And people are like, oh, I really want to see that. It's so cool. And I'm like, that's awesome. I don't want to waste my time showing you that thing because it's federally regulated. So like, I'm just not interested in the tire kickers. But if tire kickers did want to come through your open house or whatever else, you're all good. Okay. Scenario 2, facilitator working with a seller accepts a showing on a buyer represented by the brokerage. The silence tells me, what does that mean, Brandon? Okay. So you can list a property for somebody and not represent them. You could just facilitate a listing for them. They can pay you for your marketing conduit services if they wanted to, such as the MLS. They could pay you for disclosures, because you can't give out disclosure forms unless they are represented, because those are copyrighted forms that you have license to only for people in which you are engaged in a contractual obligation. So
just a sidebar, you as an agent cannot receive any compensation for real estate services. It must go through the brokerage. Just a sidebar.
Yep. Good
Thank
clarification. You. Yep. Appreciate that. So facilitator working with a seller. So somebody says, hey, can you just put this on the MLS? Sure, I can do that, right? Like if that's part of your business model, I don't knock you for it. Not a recommendation from the brokerage that's part of your business model. But if that is one of your income sources in real estate, that's totally fine. So you put it on MLS, and then all of a sudden I walk through with a buyer, show them that thing. Okay. And my buyer who's under contract wants to write an offer. Guess what? You are now acting as a buyer's broker in that situation. It's while the in-house representation converts automatically to the buyer broker role because the facilitator agreement is subservient to a true representation contract. That making sense?
How do you know that though? Think of it this way, like, so say, let's just say must act as buyer's broker. So say you're representing the buyer and you don't know if there's a facilitator agreement on the sell side. How would I know that? That belongs to our brokerage.
Yeah. How would you know that? What would you do?
Taylor, can you help me with this? Darcy? I don't know. Christine?
You got the right action, but the wrong person.
Christine?
The agent, the listing
Oh,
agent.
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
And usually, and you're okay. This is why we do these, right? So, and I would say usually you're going to see like limited services agreement are usually outlined in MLS too, like they're
Oh,
noted,
yeah. Yeah, I've
right?
seen that.
Yeah. So that would be like a limited service agreement where they're acting as a facilitator. Traditionally, it's a facilitator role. Sometimes it's full representation, but then they like take things off, and I think that's shady. So we don't do that. But if you were to just put something inside of MLS, $1,000 or whatever, then you would dump that in there and off you go, right? So it would just be that simple. But yeah, so you would call the agent. The other thing you would know is you would know it when it came across in the purchase agreement, right? In the event of that somebody called you, you were again facilitator. You were UPS. You can send stuff. So if I write an offer to you, Ashley, and my buyer goes to one of your listings that you just put into MLS, I submit the offer to you, and if I checked we're dual agency, you would have to send that back on an amendment because I didn't do my job and call you to understand your relationship. Does that make sense?
No. Yeah.
So, I mean, it can be just a simple phone call, but it's also one of those things that you can always try to work through to figure out. It's rare in full transparency because at our brokerage, we don't really value the MLS inputting. So for this scenario in our world and in our team to happen would be pretty unlikely. I don't know of anybody currently who says, MLS entry is part of my business plan. Not that I know of. Maybe if somebody does in the room, that's totally fine. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just not what we teach and preach at Crown because we believe in full service, right? So it's just a different model.
So Brandon, on the agency side of that, when we check buyer rep, seller rep, facilitation, or dual agency, if you're in that scenario, you would both be checked as the buyer rep?
Correct.
Okay, I'll make sure. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, because in this scenario, that's the default role that you're going to. So it's a really good question. I appreciate that, Jay. I'm assuming that was Jay for the record. Okay. Cool beans. Okay, so let's talk about getting paid because everybody likes the money.
Thanks, Fleming. I get to the deep technical shit.
I don't know. I don't think that was there. But anyway, my karaoke skills are lackluster at best. Okay, so written facilitator services agreement. Again, compensation through the broker. 8220 or 8266, excuse me, is always going to come into play, where you need everything in writing happening all the way through. The other thing you want to make sure of, either party can pay you for the record, right? Like if you are representing somebody, obviously that person pays you in a facilitation capacity. You can get paid by either party, and this trips people up sometimes because you could be representing somebody, so you could be representing a buyer going to a for sale by owner. The for sale by owner had a terrible experience with real estate agents, said, I'm never using one of you again. And it's the perfect house, right? Well, you're going to walk in and you're going to represent your buyer to the best of your ability, which could mean dealing with some dummy head seller who has no idea what they're doing, and they're trusting AI to, guide them through this whole thing. Which, by the way, I don't know if you saw there are some new headlines that came out this last week where sellers and agents are all getting in trouble because they're using AI to negotiate, but AI is actually just using web data. And I don't know if you know this, stuff on the internet is not always accurate. So it's been really interesting to watch how that's going to blow up in people's faces. So anyway, but in this situation, so I'm walking in. Guess what? Just like a normal transaction, I can be compensated as a buyer's agent from the seller's brokerage, or my buyer. Same thing is true. I can be compensated by the for sale by owner, or my buyer. I've just removed one of the variables, right? Like it's still the seller, it's just they don't have a listing brokerage. So I just take that out of the equation. So I still have the seller or my buyer can still compensate you. And again, you can do flat rate, you can do a percentage, which is most common, you can do an hourly rate, whatever the agreement says. You can do whatever you need to feel as though you are getting your value worth through that. Traditionally, we always talk about a percentage with a minimum, right? That's usually our threshold in our caliber. But again, everybody's a little bit different. I got one client right now that I'm about tempted to start charging hourly because of how much work they're sucking from me. And it's just not going to do it, team. Love them, but it's not going to do it. So the other thing to remember is disclosure is still required. Again, in Minnesota, which we're talking about right now, would still be 1 to 4, right? 1 to 4 units. Anything over that is not required. And it's important for you to remember. I want you to start thinking of this, and this is a phrase I was thinking about that I'm going to start harping and just start saying again. Paper first, services second. I don't care what relationship you're in, paper first, services second. No signed agreement, no compensation, and there's no relational clarity. Back in college, we used to call it the DTR, right? We're going to define the relationship. No idea if that's still a thing, because now apparently all the young kids are talking, which I still don't fully understand because I'm old now, is what I'm recognizing. So anyway, the reality says that services come second, paper's got to come first. If you don't have a signed agreement or clarity within the relationship, there's no outline of compensation. You should not be providing services. You're in a default facilitator role, which is requiring confidentiality is the only fiduciary obligation you have. Again, fiduciary, fancy word that just means legally obligated to, right? Legally required. That's all you got to remember. So you can still get paid. And in a facilitator role, again, you're going to sign a facilitation agreement with a party and that person, but then the purchase agreement can specifically outline how the facilitator is going to get paid, right? They can negotiate that, or you can just sign 2 facilitation agreements too. Then that's fine as well. But the moment you have representation, that representation is going to trump it, and then you can't facilitate the deal. You could call one of your other friends, right, and ask them if they wanted to step in, if they didn't like true representation. But even an outside agency coming in, I've never heard of somebody facilitating one side and a different brokerage representing the other because it's just messy, right? So, and everybody blurs the line. So you try to keep it as clean and simple as you can. So remember, no matter what, I want you to get your papers first, services second. Now remember, a check does not create agency relationship. The paperwork does, okay? So just because you're getting paid by somebody, don't mean you owe them nothing, okay? You got to understand the paperwork is what's going to define the relationship. The check is just the aftermath of your services, okay? Is that really clear, or do we got some questions on how we're getting paid in this facilitation world? I feel like I should start a new rule that says everybody's got to come on camera for stuff. Okay, I'm just assuming I'm explaining this really well then, and we should have no issues with agency anymore. That's what I'm learning. Okay, North Dakota side, we're not going to talk through, but here's a couple things for you. Just a fun little factoid. In North Dakota, there is no facilitator status. They call it a non-agent serving a customer, which is kind of interesting, okay? Which is totally fine. So this is just the fun side of it. We say a facilitator, they say a non-agent assisting a customer. We say we're representing somebody, they say a client because there's a written agency agreement. Unrepresented is a customer. A facilitator services agreement is a non-agency disclosure and which is not an agency agreement, which is kind of fun. Fiduciary advocacy only, and so confidentiality in North Dakota goes out the window, by the way. Fun fact. So you can just blab anything you want out there in the Great West. It's pretty fun. Okay, we're gonna move on from this. Okay, so here's a couple things, right? So when you start talking about facts and opinions, this is always one of those things too. So when we say the listing price is $425. Even in Minnesota, you can drop facts under a facilitator role. Seller's disclosure notes prior water intrusion. You can say that that's a fact. It's on a document, right? The inspection deadline in paragraph 12 is July 15th. Like, it's written in a document. It's a fact. Okay. Comp sales show 390 to 430. Comp. Okay. Seller countered at 365. What would you like to do? What would you like to do? Okay. Then you switch to the other side. Once we start dropping opinions or the I would statements, that's when we start to say, you should offer 410. Seller will probably take 400. Let's give it a shot, right? You don't need an inspection. This house is great. Waive the appraisal to make it stronger, right? When you start bringing the opinions into this thing, that's where you start to go. And my favorite is always, here's where we are, here's where they are, and I'm pretty confident I've been doing this long enough that we're going to meet right about here, right? That's an opinion, but yet you still have the opportunity to walk through that. So it just comes down to the space of understanding kind of where you are and what you want to do. So I'm going to skip through some of this. Okay, so here's something to kind of walk through this, right? So the buyer declines representation in the great state of Minnesota, and that's totally fine, right? So you can simply say, you have options, right? I can represent you with full fiduciary duties or work with you as a facilitator. I can handle paperwork, logistics, and factual information, but I do not advise, don't negotiate, and I do not represent you. The two words that I always use is advocate and advise. Those are the two words that I always say when somebody's asking about, well, what makes you different than the other agent down the road? Well, it's the advocacy. And sorry, I just read Keegan's comment about how she's getting ready for the day. Welcome. You can come on camera anytime, Keegan. Okay, so you can advocate or you can advise, right? So those are the two major things that we're going to do inside of that space, which transitions from a facilitator role into that representation role. Okay. So either way it goes in writing, paperwork first, services second, including how I'm paid. And here's the disclosure that explains both. Right. So when you start to go through there, hey, you got options, right? Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, like, I totally get it. You have options. I can present you, represent is the word, or present you. That might be kind of a fun way to do things, right? I can represent you with full fiduciary obligations or work with you as a facilitator. And then you can work through whatever that might look like, which is fun.
Brandon, real quick, why do you think that the facilitator role is becoming more popular this year than in other years?
Great question. Who's got a theory? I have mine.
I think buyers are going and finding properties themselves. And so I think a lot of what we're getting, or at least in the Park Rapids office, is buyer and seller have already come together. They just need somebody to do the paperwork. That's what I've been seeing.
That was both of my transactions. Yeah, same thing.
I like that Keegan, she was honest. She's legitimately getting ready. Hi, I love it. Thanks for being on camera. Looking great today. Foundation, nice base application. Well done. Little contour lines today or no contour? Going contour. Okay, I love it. It's going to be great. I have girls in my house.
I was going to say, you know too much about makeup.
Reagan is all about it right now. Let me tell you, I'm getting all the education on things I don't need to be educated on. But I love her, so I sit and I listen to her. Anyway, okay. Well, let me ask you this. Okay, so a Minnesota facilitator. Okay. Actually, these are all Minnesota questions because we didn't do the North Dakota side. Okay, so
Brandon, you didn't answer the question though. What is your opinion of why we're getting facilitations?
Oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't answer the question because I don't like to always talk, but I tend to do it a lot. So here's my working theory. Number one, so coming out of COVID, where we were going gangbusters, right? It was pretty easy to sell properties in the COVID era. Everybody had extra money. People were able to move with a lot more freedom. There was just a lot of factors that contributed to a massive increase in transactional volume. Now, coming out of that, we're getting normalizing. We're like pre-COVID levels of inventory. We're, as Katie shared with some of her stuff on on our Crown-wide meetings with stats, like a lot of our markets are starting to balance out. Park Rapids being the very first market to balance out, right? So meaning there's an equal number of buyers, equal number of sellers. So when we start to look at the data trends, my working theory right now is that you're starting to see still a lot of people who are willing to buy the neighbor's house, right? Sell to family at a discount. Whether I got one right now that they're like, well, I'd like to gift this to my kids. I'm like, please be very careful on how you do that. But nevertheless, there is the tendency where I think people are starting to recognize that there is opportunities maybe for some cost reductions, but they're also not utilizing agents as much to find the properties, and finding people is a lot more easy. Like you can scroll any of the marketplaces on Facebook and see a massive amount of increase in people listing properties, or just instead of coming to you and saying, hey Jay, I'm thinking of selling this thing. I'd sell it if I got this, right? Well, they don't have to waste your time, and we don't have to say no to them, because they'll just throw it on Facebook Marketplace and see if somebody's willing to pay the extra premium, right? But once somebody says, yeah, I'll do that, then people go like, oh, I don't actually have any clue what I'm doing. No, you really don't. You also don't know all the liability in the state that you're leaving on the table by not hiring a professional to advise you and advocate for you through this transaction. So I think when we start to look at the market data and the timeframes of where we are, you see a lot more of the facilitation stuff come into play, because people over the last couple of years who had the money and also said, hey, if you ever think of selling, let me know. Well, taxes have caught up, insurance has caught up. The cost to own that second property is significantly more expensive now than it was 4 or 5 years ago. And I've seen a lot of people go, this thing just ain't worth it for the 3 weekends I use it, right? I think I've had a handful of friends who've said, I think I'm going to sell my hunting land. Like I use it 2 weeks out of the year, and it's costing me, 20 grand plus all the trips I got to do. It's just not as much fun as it used to be. So I think there's a couple facets inside of there as to why we're seeing an increase in that role. And I also think the consumer got more educated on it because of the settlement. And I think agents are now forced to do their job better. So they're disclosing agency and they're learning about Facilitator. And like I tell people, it's like, hey, if you don't want my value, which is my information and my advice and counsel, totally fine. But I'm going to reduce my fee too, because I'm not going to waste as much time on you, and I'm not going to give you as much value. So I think there's a lot of that's coming into play too. So there's my ramble. You're welcome. Anybody got anything to add, I guess? Does it make sense? Does it make sense? I don't know. All right.
Well, it makes sense.
Tell me this. A Minnesota facilitator tells the buyer, between us, I'd offer 15,000 under list. Seller's desperate. Is that a good thing to do or a bad thing to do?
You just gave advice.
Anybody want to disagree? Good. That is a bad thing to do. Okay. Between us, I would offer, right? That's advice and counsel. Please don't do that. Okay. Now, as a facilitator, you fill in a purchase agreement and all the blanks at the buyer's discretion and deliver it to the listing agent. Is that good or bad?
You cut out. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, did I cut out? Sorry.
On my side,
okay.
but...
So as a facilitator, you fill out a purchase agreement at the buyer's direction and deliver it to the listing agent. Good or bad?
Good.
Yeah, fine.
Good. Love it. Minnesota facilitator. As the facilitator, you know the basement floods every spring and you say nothing because I don't represent anybody. Good or bad?
Bad.
Bad, it's material fact.
Good. That is a material fact. Yep. As a facilitator working with a buyer, you set up a showing on one of our crown listings and you continue to operate as a facilitator. Good or bad?
Bad. You have to represent the seller.
Thank you very much. A facilitator is paid 2.5% by the seller under a signed written facilitator services agreement. Is that okay or is that bad?
Okay.
Is it set that way?
Well,
What does it say, Christine?
it's in a signed written facilitator services agreement.
Can you
So
repeat it?
a facilitator is paid 2.5% by the seller under a signed facilitator services agreement.
Yes.
That's fine.
That is fine. Yes. Yep.
I think
Um,
that one threw everybody off because they forget that facilitator can mean seller or buyer, right? My brain went directly to buyer, and I was like, well, we don't know if it's been agreed in the purchase agreement yet, right? That's where my head went.
it's almost like it's a trick question. Okay. You guys are so fun. Okay. Let's see here. A Minnesota facilitator advertises full representation, half the price. Good or bad?
That's bad.
And
It's not full
Bad.
representation.
Good. Okay, so you start to say, I'm only a facilitator while coaching buyers' negotiations, recommending counters, and promising to protect their interests.
No,
Good or
bad.
Bad.
bad? Good. Thank you very much. Let's see here. So, okay. So this is a fun scenario. So a customer, so a buyer confides in their max price, right? You as the licensee represent the seller, but in a facilitation capacity, you hear the buyer's max price and pass it on to the seller. Your listing.
Represent the seller.
Mhm.
Who's representing the buyer? They're just nobody, facilitator?
Nobody.
Yep. Nobody. They walk into your open house and they say, man, I wouldn't pay more than X for this. Do you pass that on?
That's a confidentiality thing, but is it detrimenting either party?
your
That's
representation contract takes precedent.
okay. So yes, then I would disclose it. Anyone else?
Yes.
What's the default role in the state of Minnesota?
We're a facilitator only.
Mm-hmm. Somebody walks in the open house and says they're willing to pay X, up to X, right? Do you pass that on to the seller or not?
Yes.
I would say yes.
I represent the seller.
Good. Thank you very much. All right. Um, let me see here.
Killing us
Okay.
this morning.
Well, you guys asked for the training. I'm just giving it to you. What do you want from me here? Okay. All right. So here's a little bit of a cheat sheet. I'm going to drop in the chat so you can have this, but and I'm sure Katie will send it out with the recording too. But I think I'm going to start giving away more freebies to those who show up to the trainings and those who don't. That's what I think I'm going to start doing. So a couple of things that I want you to remember before we close out the opportunities here. So these are some red light questions you can ask yourself, right? So am I providing fact or recommending a decision? Am I transmitting instructions or developing a strategy? Would this statement help the customer gain an advantage over my client? Has the customer shared something they mistakenly believe is confidential? Does the behavior make the customer reasonably believe that I represent them? Because again, you got to remember, if you're going to court, the court's always going to default to the sheep and the consumer on what they felt your representation was versus anything else, which is why we always say papers first, service second, right? Does this question require legal, tax, inspection, lending, or insurance expertise? If so, get it. And have I complete a signed written non-agency disclosure before providing services? So there is a lot of components when it comes into this. So again, hopefully the big thing is, and these are some of the things we've seen. Yes, you can get paid. Okay. Be very careful recognizing that confidentiality is one of those components that lingers. Okay. And goes to the grave. Confidentiality always supersedes, right? So you have to, that's just part of our rules. And then lastly, is making sure that the moment you would respond to a question with the I would, that's your flag to go, I have to transition. And again, you can always, if you enter a facilitator agreement with somebody, you can always transition them to a client. That is totally okay. Happens all the time with me. People are like, hey, Brandon, so-and-so wants to buy, my grandson wants to buy our lake cabin. Totally cool. I don't need to represent you at all. Let's go through this thing. So we get to the process, and next thing you know, they're like, well, what should we do here? I would ding, 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 right? Like, okay, like we have to have a conversation here. Remember I told you originally, I can't advise or counsel you unless we switch roles. Now, I'm going to tell you in full transparency, you can transition to a listing contract in this scenario, and you can still do it for 1%. You can still do it just because you're transitioning roles does not mean you're transitioning compensation. Now, it should, in full transparency, because the value you contain in your brain and the brokerage is worth more than just shuffling papers. Okay. So the moment you answer an I would, do I think your value increases? Absolutely. Do I think some of you have hearts that are bigger and you just want to help your client over like getting compensated? I absolutely think that. And I know that. And it's not wrong. It's just a different business model. You can transition, you cancel the facilitation agreement, and then you just write a listing contract. Done. And you can even put a withhold in there so it doesn't go in MLS. Because guess what? The more you can transition somebody to a buyer or seller contract, not only does that help out your ability with awards, production, all the fun things that those actually matter. Because facilitation deals, if I can talk clearly, they don't count for any of that, which is tough because we're starting to see an increase in them, right? The more you can transition away from facilitation deals, the safer you are in your lane and in your pillar of your expertise and being able to guide and counsel people and earn their respect versus just shuffling papers. I'm not against them. There is a time and place for them, but the majority of facilitation deals, I promise you, you are answering the question with, well, I would fill in the blank. And that's your flag and your trigger in order to transition that relationship to a formal representation agreement. Okay.
Brandon,
Yes, sir.
I haven't been involved because I've been making sauerkraut during that whole meeting. So I'm sorry.
I love sauerkraut, just for the record.
I know. I just got 8 heads of cabbage out of the garden and got it done. But I was going to add, for most people, they all come to you and say, will you facilitate this and put it together? And you can guarantee you, I say, do you have it negotiated? Oh, yeah, everything's right. You just need to write it up. You start the process and they never, oh, I didn't know. Well, what about the refrigerator and the stove? And none of them talk about anything through the process. And then you get stuck in a bad position. And I always say, it's like, it never is easy. It's not. There always is a problem.
And I completely agree with you, Vern. In those situations, if I can, usually my best advice going back to it is like, hey, start it at a fixed rate listing contract that's withheld from MLS. Okay. You don't have to do the input. You just need the PID, put the withhold form in. Our office administrators will take care of making sure you get compliant, provided you provide paperwork on time. And you're done. And then you can do it all. And then in the event that you need more of that, then you just transition it. You can always amend the fee structure based upon your menu of services. You can always take it off withhold and send it full to the MLS, whatever you need to do to make that client happy. But it's a really good point, Bern, is because people think they have it figured out because what they think they know is price and when is possession going to change. That's all they really think about. And we all know that there's a ton more questions that got to be answered to take care of them. So it's 10 o'clock. We will end the recording. I will hang on, though, if anybody's got any questions. Katie, any quick announcements before we depart for the day?
Just remember the mastermind is tomorrow, all about AI and making sure that you show up in the AI search results. Same time, same place.
All right. Bless you all. I'll hang around if you got any questions. See you later.